Hello, I'm Pat Collins. Welcome to Criminal Justice Matters. Immigration policy is the subject of this edition. Give us your tired, your poor reads the poem by Emma Lazarus, but of late it would have to read give us you and you, but not you and not too many from this or that country. Such is the present patchwork quilt of immigration policy. Today we'll take a look at that system, what works and what needs fixing. Our guest, Dr. David Brotherton, is Department Chair and Professor of Sociology here at John Jay College and co-editor of the book Keeping Out the Other from Columbia University Press. Dr. Brotherton, welcome to the show, and I'd like to start out, I'd like you to give us a brief overview, if that's not too big a question, of American immigration policy, maybe a little bit of what it was and how it got the way it is today.
Well, for the longest time after World War II, especially after the 1960s, we had a fairly progressive immigration policy. Prior to that, we had an immigration policy that favoured Western Europe. After the 1960s, after '64, we had a policy that gave immigrants from third world countries a fair crack at coming to the United States.
What started the pattern of keeping certain groups out? I know I have a vague knowledge of the fact that there were signs around the city, late 19th century, early 20th century, things like Irish need not apply. And obviously that changed a great deal, and we seem to have a pattern of deciding this group is good, this group is bad in terms of national interests. Reading in your book, the 1920s, we actually had, it kind of surprised me, Chinese exclusion laws.
Right.
How'd that pattern evolve?
Well, the different groups in the United States, usually dominated by the WASPs, Western, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, have basically sought to control power, hold on to power, both through race and class means. And over the years, the immigrant groups or the other ethnic groups have changed according basically to the needs of the economy. At a certain point, the economy has needed cheap labour, so it brought in Chinese labourers. And at another point, the economy dipped.
Why do we have to exclude them at some point?
Because the economy dipped, and these groups were only allowed in for their labour, but they weren't socially integrated. And so basically white working class then challenged their ability, capacity to integrate into US society. It was a competition for the resources. And so they were excluded, and you had the dominant power elites using the splits, in the working class, ethnic splits, to keep them out.
I realize you're a sociologist, and I'm going to put you on the spot with an economic question.
Yeah.
We've got apparently a big-time recession going on right now. You mentioned that the needs of labor, cheap labor, often causes immigration patterns. What's this current economy going to do to immigration? Well,
it's already started. You're already starting to see less immigrants attempting to come to the United States because the demand has dropped off, especially across the Mexican border. At the same time, of course, the economy of Mexico and other southern Latin American states is also, nosediving according to the Depression, but there's nowhere for them to go. So you're getting a push and pull effect. So it's interesting that internally there's a big anti-immigrant kind of campaign. What you see, like for example, Dobbs, on the television, CNN, using the anti-immigrant fervour to score political points.
But isn't that really ethnocentrism of a sort, as a country, as any nation tries to define itself? Our culture works, your culture doesn't. Doesn't it happen in other countries as well? Or is it
no, it does. I mean, in Europe, you have the issue of asylum seekers as people coming in from the ex-Eastern European countries, be it Romania or Poland or Albania, etc., trying to get into Britain and France, and there's a big backlash against those also. I mean, we see society is always going to be split between us and them, and basically, the leadership of these societies need to, pay a great deal of attention to it in order to basically, campaign against racism.
Some of the commentators I've seen banging the anti-immigration drum seem to be playing to people's fears of people that are different. What exactly
Sure.
were you afraid of with immigrants?
Well, you know, objectively, you're not really afraid of anything. I mean, it's really interesting if you look at crime rates or who does crime in American society. The population that gets involved least in crime are first-generation immigrants. The lowest crime rate is for basically recent immigrants.
Say that. That's something I wasn't expecting. Say that again, because there's a link usually made between crime and poverty, and we say, okay, who are the poorest? Maybe the people who just got here, therefore they must commit the most crime. Isn't that the common perception?
There is a perception, but it's not a true perception. Basically, you know, once again, the first-generation immigrants do the least amount of crime of any social group in American society. The rule of thumb is that the longer you're in American society, the more crime-prone you tend to be. So the people that get involved most in crime are second- and third-generation immigrants.
Our culture, our society changed on 9/11 in so many ways. We almost, at least in New York, I've said we have no more public buildings. Everywhere you go, there's some kind of security. Right. It's a different world. How has that changed? I'm not even, just as I said that, I thought about the way we travel, taking our shoes on and off. How has that affected immigration?
Well, enormously. It's terribly important to understand, you know, what happened to immigration policy around the mid-90s, around 1996. We completely changed our approach to immigrants. The immigration law became draconian, and we decided to bring in deportation laws.
Could you be more specific? I mean, how do they change?
They changed in the sense that if you, after 96, if you're a permanent resident with a green card and you ran afoul of the criminal justice system and received a sentence of 12 months or more, you're automatically deported or deportable for life. You're not allowed to appeal that deportation order for 50 years.
Oh, 50. Wow. I was about to ask, isn't there a series of appeals, or
no,
you can with
you go through an immigration court. There is some modicum of appeals, but the basis for you winning your appeals is almost zero.
Has this made certain groups targeted unfairly?
Absolutely. Black and brown people. If you look at the people who have been deported in the last, since 96, 13 years, about 98% of them are either black or brown from the Caribbean or South and Central America.
How does this tie into politics? Let's take the Reagan era, for example, when things got more conservative, to the Obama administration, where things, it looks like we'll move in another direction. How does politics affect immigration?
The worst immigration laws occurred under the Clinton administration.
Really? Yeah.
Clinton signed off on the omnibus bill and said it was the worst bill he'd ever signed in his life, and he thought he might be able to repeal certain aspects of the law. He never did, and so we're living with that. What you've got basically are three campaigns, three crusades overlapping each other. You have the war on drugs, overlaid by the war on the immigrant, overlaid by the war on the terrorist. And they all combine to create this very serious hysteria around immigration and making laws much more punishing than they need be.
Was it political, or just political, or an attempt to deal with what we're seeing as some real problems?
No, it was political. They used the threat of the immigrant as a way to justify increasing law and order campaigns.
That fear factor we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, the politicians were getting elected on the fear factor. And it started way back, you know, with Willie Horton and the rapist and all that sort of thing. And it's the other. You constantly create another. Hated this stereotype to gain political momentum for your own campaigns.
We're very early in the Obama administration, and the economy, of course, has become the overwhelming theme, at least for the moment. But how do you think this administration is going to play out in terms of immigration policy?
Well, it has to do something. There is no real policy at the moment. It's a complete mishmash. The Napolitano, who's going to run all this in the new cabinet, comes out of Arizona, where they have huge problems with both documented and undocumented immigrants. So, and she knows that simply a law and order approach, toughening the border and so on and so forth, is virtually useless. They've built the biggest wall probably between any two countries in the world. And, you know, but all you do is you drill underneath it, you make tunnels underneath. There's been no effect on the drugs trade. The only reason that there's a drop in immigration, as I said, is because of the lack of demand for immigrant workers, but it's not because the war's had any effect.
We almost can't talk about immigration and immigration policy without it becoming, even if I don't say the word, it almost becoming synonymous with illegals. Is there legal immigration, and how does it work, and who does it favor?
Sure, there's legal immigration. You can get a visa. It takes you, you know, much longer now than it used to. But yeah, you can come in. But the vast majority of people who come in on other visas, not work visas.
Give me some examples.
Well, you come in with a visiting visa, you know, to visit your family or go on holiday. You simply overstay and find a job and go into the informal economy, with millions working in the informal economy. Probably in New York alone is well over 1 million, I would imagine.
What can or should be done about that, if anything?
Well, it's a complicated question. Obviously, we need a much fairer system whereby people are given opportunities to integrate into American society rather than constantly being excluded and kept on the outside. But the other thing is, if you are really serious about reducing the inflow, then we need much more equitable social and economic relations with third world countries so that they can develop themselves and so the people of those countries don't need to emigrate.
Do the people who get here and are on a visa and then end up staying and go underground, I don't know if you can answer this, but do they intend to do that? Is that a plan, or is that just something that happens because things are better here?
I think it's both really. I mean, it depends what you're coming away from. Go back to the reason why crime is so low amongst immigrant groups, first generation, is because that they're still working so hard to make it here. You have to have hope and optimism. And compared to where you came from, where you know, most of the world now is living on $1 a day, right? Even if you stand outside the Home Depot in Long Island and get picked up, you're going to make about $50 a day, aren't you? 50 times, basically, where you came from. So it's an enormous incentive, isn't it, to stay? And then what you do is you save. You're very frugal. You double up. You live in a room with 6 or 7 other guys, and you save your money. You send it back home. I mean, that's so much of the third world now, especially around the United States. The #1 revenue is money sent back from the United States. Take, for example, the Dominican Republic or Jamaica. The #1 revenue is not tourism, it's called remesas, money sent back from the United States. That's how they survive. So you have this terrible dependency, much more than you ever had before, as part of the global economy.
You also, I'd imagine, must have tremendous fear. I mean, I know in this recession, I hear people in all spheres of life for the first time in my life worrying about losing their jobs. It brings to mind the fear of an immigrant if he or she gets arrested, gets in difficulty. What kind of rights do they have?
None.
How's that?
The whole point is that if you're not a citizen, you don't have any rights. This is when you're picked up as a permanent resident, but a non-citizen, you see.
Okay.
And you could get put in a federal prison.
Now that's a person that's here legitimately.
Yeah, with a green card.
Okay. All right.
Right. And they usually put off getting citizenship because they thought there was no point, because they have the same rights as any Americans. And then they run afoul of the law and they realise they have no rights whatsoever.
And I'm not talking about knocking over a 7-Eleven. I'm talking about some minor infraction.
It could be DUI. It could be anything. People are deported for breaking, for motor injunctions. It's not uncommon. I mean, you can get pickpocket. You can, as long as you have a 12-month sentence, and our sentencing laws have become so extreme, it's terribly easy to get a 12-month sentence. Terribly easy.
You mentioned you have a particular interest in the Dominican immigrant population.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you know, it's the first or second largest immigrant group, you know, in New York City. The amount of Dominican residents in New York is would make it the second largest Dominican city after Santo Domingo. So we have this this umbilical relationship with the Dominican Republic, especially since the 1964 Dominican Revolution, and when we sent the Marines in, to overthrow their democratically elected president, Bosch. What happened after that was a mass immigration from the Dominican Republic, much like the Puerto Ricans came after World War II. And they settled in different places, Washington Heights, areas of Brooklyn, and over time became integrated into American society, and many of them took citizenship in this country.
One case that I found particularly touching in your book was that of Mr. Roberto Delgado. Could you tell us about that?
Well, he was a guy I was called to testify. I do a lot of expert witness.
Expert witnessing where?
In immigration appeals cases. Basically, I'm called upon to explain to the judge the level of the threats posed to deportees once they're...
I want to clarify something we talked about before. Immigrants don't have any appeals, I thought.
There's an immigration court, and there is on paper an appeal you can make before you're deported. But the only way you can win an appeal for a man, a male deportee, is to prove that the government will torture you when you set foot in the country again, you see, and they can very rarely prove that. So I'm called upon to basically testify what awaits the deportee once they go back to Santo Domingo or to Kingston, Jamaica, or wherever. And what I say is that they will be picked up often by the police in an informal way, because they blame the deportees for bringing crime from New York City to their country, you see, they're scapegoats.
Right.
In this case with Delgado, I was testifying on his behalf. He was a guy that came to this country and he was 2 years old and lived down on Bleecker Street with his aged parents.
Now he's 2 years old, so he's non-citizen then, right?
His parents became citizens, and he was brought as a non-citizen and gained his green card, right, a permanent resident. And he was in his early 30s. Well, what happened to him is that he, he went to school and graduated from high school and got picked up by a college in Oklahoma and became, part of their baseball team. But he got an athletic scholarship, but he couldn't read or write. And he graduated college without reading or writing. And he failed, unfortunately, miserably in his baseball career, and left college and came back to Bleecker Street and became very, very depressed and started drinking. He couldn't find work. And one day he, on one of his drinking bouts, he went next door to a baker's shop and sort of picked a fight with the baker, and the baker threw him out. And to get back at him, the baker said that he stole somebody's credit card, which was untrue. He just wanted to get back at this guy. So the police came and arrested him, and they told him that if he didn't agree to the accusation, he would be deported. So he agreed, and he gave him 3 years to 3 to 5. So he spent 3 years in prison
for something he didn't do.
For something he didn't do. There was no evidence for it whatsoever. And then he was deported. You see? So I went to the appeals court in the Eastern Correctional Facility with all his family. He had about 40 members of his family there, including his cousin, who was a John Jay graduate. She just graduated in criminal justice. And his family couldn't believe that they wouldn't see their son again unless they visited the Dominican Republic. And it was terribly heartrending. And the mother was begging the judge to have compassion and leave her son be, let him stay. And she had a heart attack on the stand and fainted. And the emergency management team came in and carried her out on a stretcher. The whole courtroom was crying. We were in there for 5 or 6 hours. The guards were crying. The guards themselves were tearing up and handing out handkerchiefs. It was the most awful, tragic scene I've ever witnessed in my life. And the judge kept saying to the lawyer, why are you bringing these witnesses here? Why are you putting them through that? And the lawyer was saying, but I don't have any other defence. They're just telling you cannot deport this man. There's no reason to deport this man. And in one telling testimony, the former John Jay student, she was asked by the lawyer, do you understand, or the judge rather, do you understand what torture means? Because the only way you can win an appeal is to prove you're going to be tortured. And her response is, she said, yes, this is torture. You're torturing my uncle. It was her uncle who was being deported. This is torture. You're needlessly putting us through this psychological, pressure and to break up and fragment our family. This is torture. This is criminal justice torture in the name of the law. And so this happens every day.
This is just, I was about to say,
this is one instance. This happens every single day. If you go down to the Federal Appeals Court downtown, you've maybe got 10 or 12 appeals every single day. If you go to different prisons where they hold these appeals within the prisons, the inmate usually, oftentimes anyway, doesn't travel even to the appeals court. He testifies from a video camera inside the prison where he's being held. See, it could be Attica, Sing Sing, whatever, Comstock. And the judge will just see him on the screen and just tell him, okay, you're being deported. He doesn't even come to the court. Well, then when he's taken out of the prison, the state prison or federal prison, they're then placed in a holding prison, which used to be run by the INS, the Immigration and Naturalisation Service, and now it's run by ICE, which is the Immigration, Custom and Excise Service, which is part of the Homeland Security Department.
So this is a process that is taking place perhaps hundreds of times a day around the country?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We have something like 30,000 people just in the INS or the ICE prison camps waiting to be deported. We have about another 120,000 inmates in federal prison waiting to be deported.
How can that change and what can change? You mentioned in your book that more is spent on law enforcement against immigrants than assistance. What would you advocate?
Well, reverse that policy. I mean, massive amounts of money is spent on law enforcement, raiding factories, building sites, looking for undocumented labour, all kinds of computers, et cetera, et cetera. But there's hardly anything given to to help undocumented immigrants defend themselves.
What would be a good first step in reversing this injustice?
Well, New York City could take the lead. I mean, we're a city of immigrants. Yeah. Unfortunately, we're not as punitive in this city as some other places, say Phoenix, Arizona, or whatever. So, and we do have a commissioner of immigration, Leonardis. But we need, much more on the books, much more help in especially immigrant areas, little clinics or legal aid or whatever it takes to give, to show immigrants their rights.
David Brotherton, we're just about out of time, but I want to thank you for bringing this situation to light. I was really unaware of it and very moved by what I read in your book. I want to mention once again, the name of that book is Keeping Out the Other, from Columbia University Press, if you'd like to know more. With it, I'm Pat Collins for John Jay College. I'll see you on the next edition. Thanks for being with us, David.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching.